Yellowstone National Park is one of the most dangerous places when it comes to encountering animals who want to kill and eat you. With over 700 grizzly bears roaming the forest there, even professional tour guides aren't safe from being devoured by these killing machines. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the gruesome grizzly bear attack on Charles Mock. Welcome to Final Affliction. Yellowstone National Park is an American national park located in the western United States, largely in the northwest corner of Wyoming and extending into Montana and Idaho. Yellowstone is the first national park in the U.S. and is also widely held to be the first national park in the world. The park is known for its many geothermal features, especially the Old Faithful Geyser, one of its most popular. While it represents many types of biomes, the subalpine forest is the most abundant. It's also part of the South Central Rockies forest ecoregion, which spans an area of 3,468.4 square miles, comprising of lakes, canyons, rivers, and beautiful mountain ranges. Yellowstone Lake is one of the largest high-elevation lakes in North America and is centered over the Yellowstone caldera, the largest supervolcano on the continent. It's erupted with tremendous force several times in the last 2 million years and is overdue to explode again soon. Grizzly bears, wolves, and free-ranging herds of bison and elk live in this park. It's safe to say Yellowstone National Park is a dangerous place to be, and with numerous recreational opportunities including hiking, camping, boating, fishing, and sightseeing attracting nearly 5 million visitors each year, it's no surprise that it's seen its fair share of tragic deaths. On April 15, 2021, Charles Mock, who was 40 years old at the time, set out into the park to do some fishing in the place he loved most, Yellowstone National Park. Charles was always an avid lover of the outdoors ever since early childhood, but out of all places in the world, he fell in love with Yellowstone. When he turned 30, he moved there permanently just so he could spend every bit of spare time he had in the park. The overwhelming sense of peace and happiness he experienced in the rugged remoteness of the park was so much that he soon sought out work inside the park. Charles wanted to spend every waking second of the day in Yellowstone, and finally got his wish when he landed a job as a tour guide for backcountry adventure. Charles wanted to catch some trout at his favorite fishing spot at the Madison River, deep in the wilderness of Yellowstone. He was aware of the risks and dangers that come with venturing this far into the wild, but had been fishing all week without any problems. It's well known that the presence of grizzly bears is an everlasting threat to the lives of all fishermen, hunters, hikers, campers, and even to area workers. Anyone venturing into the wilderness here is advised to carry some form of self-protection, and Charles knew this. He always made sure to keep his pistol and bear spray with him just in case he ever had to use it. But after a week straight of fishing, he felt safe enough to leave his pistol at home and only bring with him his bear spray. Charles arrived at the river and began unpacking his equipment from his truck. He gathered his fishing pole, camera, and supplies and began soaking in the peace that he always felt here. He also brought along his tackle box full of other important items and began his half-mile hike down the trail towards the water. As always, he kept a wary eye out during the walk for the number of dangerous animals in the area. Bison, grizzly bears, and even moose have been involved in attack on humans in the prior years, and that was the last thing Charles wanted to come across alone in the wilderness. He'd had his fair share of bear encounters throughout the years. Charles and his friend Riley had numerous run-ins with grizzlies who had even bluff charged them several times to intimidate them, but luckily they were always just warnings to scare off the men, who thankfully were never actually attacked, but a terrifying experience nonetheless. As Charles Charles walked along the riverbank looking for a good spot to dip his line and snapping photos of the beautiful scenery. He unknowingly walked into one of the most dangerous situations he could have found, a large moose carcass that looked to be half eaten by a grizzly bear. What Charles failed to realize was that the bear who claimed this food source had already been fighting to defend its food to the point of killing and partially eating another grizzly, and was still enraged and irritated from the event and watching in the distance. Charles froze as soon as he realized what he was walking towards and quietly scanned the tree line while listening carefully for any signs of the bear. He slowly began backing up the way he came, being careful not to turn his back to the carcass, knowing that if the grizzly was watching, he would more than likely attack him while his back was turned. All of a sudden, Charles hears a loud wolf sound he recognizes as a bear, which sends shivers down his spine. He immediately stopped in his tracks and surveyed the area around him for the upset bear, while simultaneously pulling out his bear spray as a precaution and prepared for what is typically a very tense standoff. As he searched the brush for the bear, the forest turned eerily silent for a few seconds before all of a sudden it came charging towards him with his head low and ears pinned back in the typical way an enraged bear moves while on the attack. Charles prayed that it was just another bluff charge, but as the bear ran closer, it didn't veer off or slow down. Time stood still for Charles as he watched as the bear's eyes focused solely on him as it came rocketing in his direction. The bear closed the last 100 feet of distance with blinding speed as Charles unloaded his bear spray at the grizzly. The orange cloud of bear spray engulfed the bear, but it seemed to have done nothing but make the bear more angry as it quickly tackled and knocked Charles to the ground. The 700-pound bear pinned Charles to the ground and focused its attack on Charles' head and neck, swiping its massive claws through Charles' flesh while its powerful jaws carved grooves into his skull. The bear seemed to be targeting its attack on Charles' head, continuously biting and swiping at his scalp, removing significant portions of flesh in the process. It then bit into his neck, tearing flesh and crucial arteries from his body as blood started to spray onto the bear and forest around him. Charles desperately raised his hands over his head and neck as a shield, but the bear clamped down on them and crushed them into useless lumps of bleeding flesh. Then the bear went in for the kill. It gripped Charles' head in its mouth and squeezed down in an attempt to crush his skull, but only managed to penetrate one of its canine teeth fully through the skull. Now, with a 2-inch hole through Charles' skull, his hands mangled and crippled and his scalp torn to shreds, the bear stopped the attack and went back to the moose carcass just a few hundred feet away. Charles was now laying unconscious in a pool of his own blood, barely hanging on to life. He gained consciousness about 10 minutes later, and despite his condition, he was determined to get to an area to reach out for help. He tried crawling, but the pain was so overwhelming he was unable to move. Charles managed to prop himself in an upright position against a tree stump, where he slowly searched his supplies with his only useful hand to find a cell phone to call for help. He dialed 911 and his call was picked up and emergency responders were immediately dispatched. Charles remained on the phone with 911 for nearly an hour, directing the officers to his location somewhere deep in Yellowstone National Park. When they finally found him, he was still clutching his bear spray can in his functioning hand despite it being completely emptied onto the bear previously. He was stabilized as best they could at the scene and immediately transported to the Eastern Idaho Emergency Medical Center in Idaho Falls for life-saving emergency medical support. The next day, as Carl and the medical team fought for his life, Montana game wardens approached the area. They made a lot of noise and were very clear in their efforts to run the bear off so they could complete their investigation into the attack. The bear had other plans though, and as they approached it, it emerged from the cover in the same threatening manner as it addressed Charles, head low and ears pinned back in clear signs of aggression. The wardens fired off special rounds that crackle and pop in an attempt to persuade the bear to back off, but it failed. As the bear powered towards the 7 volunteers and their dog, it got bogged down in some deep snow, temporarily slowing its attack. The bear quickly regained its traction and continued its advance towards the group. The bear closed in within 40 feet of the men before they discharged lethal rounds and dropped the bear. As its blood seeped into the soil, its rage and aggression seemed to dissipate as it stopped all movement. The wardens performed a necropsy on the bear's carcass and investigated the attack scene. On Charles' clothes, they had previously noted the contents of his bear spray can. As they examined the bear, the same was found on the bear's fur, meaning that Charles had in fact discharged his bear spray successfully. Once the bear had been cut open and the contents of its guts analyzed, the wardens determined that the bear had been feeding on the moose it was defending that found tissues from at least one other grizzly bear, confirming the grizzly was previously fighting off other bears from its meal, and most likely why he was so aggressive towards Charles and the wardens. Back at the medical center, Charles had 2 surgical procedures in an attempt to save him. According to doctors, the surgeries went well, but within a few days, Charles suffered a severe stroke and died from the trauma inflicted during the bear attack. West Yellowstone organized a memorial service at the Union Pacific Dining Lodge in town, and his family held a private ceremony in commemoration of Charles. 2 nights after Charles was mauled, the town of West Yellowstone had a bear visit them. The locals point out that the bears are so numerous that they can hardly avoid run-ins with them. The greater Yellowstone area, which spans portions of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, is reported to have more than 700 grizzly bears. Fatal attacks have increased in recent decades as the bears recover from threatened status, as well as humans moving into more remote areas than ever before. Since 2010, grizzlies have killed 8 people. However, grizzlies are still under federal protection in areas outside of Alaska, although recent discussions have begged review of that status, fearing that as long as grizzlies remain protected, their numbers will continue to rise, increasing the chances of more innocent people unfortunately meeting their final affliction.